I didn't buy the house for recognition. I bought it because I remembered my son at 12, building tiny homes from couch cushions, promising, "One day I'll build you a real one, Mom." So when I sold the house his father and I built with our bare hands, I didn't think twice. I thought I was fulfilling a dream we both shared. But dreams change. And sometimes, so do sons. It had been 10 months since I sold our old ranch house, the same one where I raised Nathan, patched his scraped knees, and taught him how to ride a bike on the gravel path out front. I remember the night I signed the listing papers. The agent looked at me, surprised. "You sure you want to sell, Mrs. Sloan? That house has been in your family for over 40 years. I smiled. "It's time to pass it on," I said. What I didn't say was why. That I needed the money to give my only son and his new wife a proper start, a foundation. The check cleared for $220,000. I cried when it did, not because I missed the house, though I did, but because I felt proud. Like I was still a mother who mattered, like I was still building something, even if it wasn't with hammers and nails. Nathan was stunned when I handed him the envelope. "Mom, this is too much. I can't take this." "It's not a gift," I told him. "It's a legacy. You build your family with this. I just want to see you happy and close." He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. I thought, this is it. This is the moment I'll remember when I'm old and gray. Funny how quickly memories change shape. We toured the house together that same weekend. It was a 2-story fixer-upper in Colorado Springs with a wraparound porch and enough rooms for kids, guests, even a library. "I'll give you the suite downstairs," he said. "It'll be your own space." His wife, Jen, smiled, a little too tightly. "It'll be cozy," she added. I should have noticed the hesitation then, but I didn't, because I believed in beginnings. I co-signed the mortgage as a financial backer. Nathan didn't qualify for the full amount alone, and even with the down payment I gave, the bank wanted a guarantor. It was fine. I was fine. I still had enough in savings to live decently, and I figured, why would I need more? I was going to live with my son. The moving day was chaotic and beautiful. Nathan brought in boxes, laughing, already planning where the TV would go. I sat on the front steps with Jen's mother, who commented, "It's nice of you to help them. Not every mother does that, you know." I smiled politely. He's my son. I'd give him everything. I didn't know I already had. The basement suite wasn't quite finished yet, so I stayed with a friend for a week while Nathan and Jen settled in. I didn't mind. I baked a pie and brought it over on Sunday, hoping to sit in the kitchen, maybe share a meal. Jen answered the door, looked startled, then called Nathan. "Oh, Mom. Hey, sorry, it's a bit messy inside. We're still unpacking." I stood on the porch holding the warm pie, nodding. "No worries, sweetheart. I just wanted to drop this off." They didn't invite me in. I tried not to read too much into it. Newlyweds, stress, boxes everywhere. I understood. But that night, I sat in my friend's guest room and stared at the ceiling. It was the first time I felt like maybe I was intruding. A week later, they told me the basement suite needed more time. Plumbing issues, mold behind the drywall. Jen suggested I find a small rental nearby. "It's just until we figure everything out," Nathan assured me. "We just want to make sure it's safe for you." I nodded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Of course, safety first. I moved into a tiny garden-level apartment 6 blocks away. I told myself it was temporary, that soon I'd have Sunday dinners with them, that I'd read bedtime stories to my future grandchildren, that I'd still matter. That spring, I walked by their house often. Sometimes I'd see Jen's family unloading groceries. Her sister, her brother, her parents. They seemed to be around a lot, more than I was. Nathan never said anything about them moving in, but their cars were always in the driveway. And then Mother's Day came. I made lemon bars, Nathan's favorite, and walked over with them warm in a tray. Music played inside. Laughter. I heard toasts. I was about to knock when I heard his voice, clear and proud. "To the woman who's always been like a second mother to me, Diane. This year I wanted to show you what you mean to us. So, Here's $21,000 toward that meditation retreat you've always wanted. Applause. Glasses clinked. Someone said, "You're such a good son." I froze, still holding the tray. No one noticed I was at the door. I left the lemon bars on the porch and walked back to my apartment slower than I had in years. That night, I sat by the window and watched their lights glow across the street, and I realized something. This wasn't a family moment. It was the opening chapter of a revenge story I never intended to write, but life had already started drafting it for me. The basement suite never happened. For weeks, Nathan gave me updates that sounded like excuses wrapped in technical terms. "They found water damage in the wall," he said one day. "The wiring's outdated," he added another. At one point, he even said the floor needed to be completely redone to meet code. I didn't press. I wanted to believe he was trying, but deep down, something itched. The kind of itch you get when people talk to you with a little too much cheer in their voice, like frosting on a cake that's already stale. By July, Jen stopped mentioning the suite entirely. Instead, she handed me a pamphlet for a senior housing complex 3 miles away and said, "Mom, they're doing discounted trials. They have yoga classes and everything." I stared at the glossy page. A picture of smiling women in pastel sweaters holding dumbbells. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Nathan saw my face and added, "It's not forever. Just until we get things sorted. I mean, it's air-conditioned and close to us, right?" That night, I packed my suitcase and moved out of the garden-level apartment I'd been renting, now trading it for a trial stay that felt more like exile. The room was beige. The bed creaked. The smell of disinfectant clung to everything, even the fake flowers on the table. A nurse named Carol knocked at my door the next morning and said, "Breakfast is at 7:15. We have a walk scheduled after." I wasn't sick. I wasn't old. But I'd been made to feel both. I still remember sitting on the bed, staring at the welcome packet. I was one signature away from slipping quietly out of their lives, not through death, through convenience. That was when it hit me. They weren't waiting to include me. They were trying to phase me out. I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, especially if you're a parent, have you ever sacrificed something big for your child, only to be made to feel like an obligation later? Let me know in the comments. I'm not alone in this, am I? The turning point wasn't a fight. It wasn't a scream or a confrontation. It was quieter than that, like a door clicking shut. One Saturday morning, I walked by their house. I wasn't even planning to stop by. I just wanted to see it. My house, the one I helped them get, the one where I'd imagined baking with grandkids, reading books in the backyard swing. But as I walked past the driveway, I saw Jen's parents unloading groceries. Again, her mother was directing her husband, pointing toward the garage with practiced authority. I knew those postures, that kind of ease. These weren't visitors. These were residents. Later that day, I asked Nathan, gently, if they were staying long. He laughed. "Oh, just until their plumbing gets fixed." 2 weeks later, their dog had a nameplate on the porch. I was losing my place in the house by inches, not by arguments. That's the thing about erasure. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it's so subtle you don't notice you've been erased until there's no space left to stand. I found myself withdrawing instinctively. I stopped dropping by. I stopped asking to help. The lemon bars I used to bake sat untouched in my freezer. I began to feel like a ghost in my own life. One afternoon, I called Nathan just to chat. Jen answered. Her tone was polite but clipped. "Nathan's in a Zoom meeting. Can I take a message?" "No, that's okay," I said, then added, "Tell him Mom called." There was a pause. "I'll let him know, Margaret." Margaret. Not Mom. Not even your mom. Just Margaret. That night, I went to a thrift bookstore downtown. I walked the aisles alone and ended up in the parenting section. A book caught my eye, Letting Go Without Losing Yourself. I flipped it open. The first chapter was titled, "You Raise Them, But You Don't Owe Them Your Soul." I didn't buy the book. I didn't need to. The title alone did the work. Something started shifting in me that night. It wasn't rage. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. A slow understanding that I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone. especially not to people who'd forgotten it. When I got home, I took out the original mortgage documents. My hands shook slightly as I found the section that named me as a co-borrower and guarantor. My name was there, in ink, tied directly to the property that now housed everyone but me. And then I noticed a footnote I hadn't paid attention to before. If the guarantor withdraws their name, the loan must be reevaluated under current income and risk profile. I read that line twice, then 3 more times. Nathan had thanked me once for making his dream possible, but that dream had grown teeth, and I just realized I still had the power to bite back. I didn't act immediately. I'm not the kind to move out of anger, but I did begin to think, to plan, to ask quiet questions to the right people at the credit union. I asked what would happen if I were to withdraw. They said they'd have to reassess the whole mortgage, reapprove Nathan on his own. I didn't say yes, not yet, but I went home and put that paper in a separate folder. I labeled it, just in case. Because sometimes the best revenge story doesn't start with a scream. It starts with a file folder and a quiet woman who's finally had enough. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't even expect a card. But I guess a part of me still hoped for something. It was my first Mother's Day since moving out of the house I bought, with nearly every cent I had. The house Nathan lived in now. The house I was supposed to live in too. I woke up that morning in the senior apartment they'd temporarily helped me into and thought, maybe he'll call early. Maybe I'll get a brunch invite. Maybe I'll get to see my son. The phone didn't ring. Not at 8, not at 10. At noon, I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the trees were full of white blossoms swaying in the breeze like they had somewhere to be. But I didn't. I hadn't had somewhere to be in months. Around 2 p.m., I decided to do something small. I baked lemon bars. Nathan used to love them. I wrapped them in a basket with a ribbon and walked the 6 blocks to their house, holding on to some vague idea of dropping them off and maybe being invited in for coffee. As I got closer, I heard music, laughter, glasses clinking. My heart picked up. Maybe they were having something. Maybe they'd forgotten to call because they were just so busy setting up. I stepped up to the porch, ready to knock. Then I heard his voice through the open window. "To Diane," Nathan said, his voice warm, proud. "You've been like a second mother to me. Steady, wise, generous. We wanted to say thank you the right way this year." I froze. Diane was Jen's mom. Her voice followed, full of surprise. "Nathan, this is $21,000? What is this for?" "A retreat, the one you always wanted, the deposits paid, flights booked." Applause. More laughter. Someone said, "You're such a good son." Another chimed in, "That's how you treat a real mother." I stood there on the porch of the house I'd paid for, holding a basket of lemon bars like some door-to-door bake sale vendor. A stranger in the scene. I backed away slowly, not making a sound. I didn't knock. I left the basket on the porch table and walked home. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I should. But instead, I sat in the quiet, drinking tea that had gone cold, staring at nothing. That kind of hurt doesn't always make you cry. Sometimes it makes you still. I kept replaying the words, real mother, not just from a guest, but from people who looked at Diane and saw a role I had poured my life into for decades. You see, when someone steals your parking spot, it's frustrating. But when someone quietly takes your place in your own child's life, that's a different kind of theft. You can't yell. You can't fight for it without looking pitiful. All you can do is sit with the silence and wonder when you became forgettable. I looked around my tiny studio. It was neat, quiet, and suddenly it felt like a waiting room. Like life had decided I was finished being a mother, and all I could do now was sit here until time called my name. I thought about the old ranch house, the one I sold, the one that still smelled like my late husband's pipe tobacco in the hallway, the fireplace we built brick by brick, the garden where Nathan used to dig for worms, all of it gone. And this house, the new one, was supposed to carry that memory forward. I'd imagined birthday candles on that porch, grandkids running through that yard, me making dinner while Nathan told stories about work and Jen rolled her eyes. All of it gone. Instead, I was replaced by someone with more polish, more presence, or maybe just better timing. Later that week, I got a thank you card, not from Nathan, from Diane. It said, "Margaret, the lemon bars were lovely. You always bake the best things. Hope you enjoyed the celebration." I read it 3 times. Celebration. I wasn't even part of it, but my lemon bars were. My name was a footnote in my own family. I realized something then. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being erased. Politely, gently, and thoroughly. And the worst part? They expected me to be okay with it. That's when the seed of something quiet started to grow. Not anger, not revenge, not yet. Just the realization that I was still alive, that I still had power. That somewhere in all the documents and deeds and loans and signatures, I had not made myself invisible. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to keep waiting for permission to matter, because there's only so long a person can be generous without being acknowledged, before they stop giving and start remembering. After that Mother's Day, I didn't bake lemon bars again. I put the baking dish back in the cupboard, the good one I'd used for 20 years, and I didn't touch it. Not because I was angry. I just didn't see the point anymore. Something in me had gone. Still. Like the lights were on, but nobody was home. The senior apartment had grown colder, not physically, but in a way I couldn't name. I went through the motions. Coffee in the morning, the occasional book club meeting, a call here and there from my cousin in Nebraska. But I stopped walking past the house. I didn't want to see Jen's family waving from the porch of what used to be my dream. Then one day, the credit union sent a generic letter, just routine paperwork. But it reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. My name was still on the loan. I sat down at the small fold-out table in my kitchenette and pulled out the original mortgage file I'd kept in a manila folder marked Home Purchase, Nathan. I flipped through it slowly, reading the documents like they were a diary of decisions I now regretted. There it was, in black and white. Borrower. Nathan Sloan, cosigner, guarantor, Margaret Sloan. Funny how one line on a page could mean so much and be treated like nothing. I remembered how rushed Nathan had been the day we closed. "Mom, just sign here. They need this to approve it. It's just a formality. You won't be on the deed." He was right. I wasn't. But I was on the loan. I was responsible, just not respected. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how easily I had given up my house, my savings, my place. Not just physically, but emotionally. I'd given it all for a promise. And what had I received? Silence. Lemon bars left on a porch. A card from the other mother. So I started asking quiet questions. I walked into the credit union, a small local branch where the tellers still wore name tags with their full names. I asked for Barbara, the woman who had helped us with the paperwork a year ago. She smiled politely when she saw me, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, as if she remembered I had once looked happier. "I'm just wondering," I asked, keeping my tone light, "what happens if a guarantor steps back, if they withdraw support for a loan?" Barbara blinked, then leaned in slightly. It would trigger a reassessment. The borrower would need to qualify independently. If they can't, well, depending on the loan terms, it might go into default or need to be refinanced. I nodded slowly. "And if the guarantor is no longer comfortable with the arrangement?" "There's a form for that," she said quietly. "It doesn't mean the house is taken away overnight, but the loan becomes unstable. The bank reevaluates." I didn't fill out the form, not yet, but I asked for a copy and took it home. That night, I opened a new folder, a clean one. I labeled it in blue ink, just in case. I slid the form inside, along with copies of my original agreement, Nathan's signature, and the timeline of every deposit and withdrawal I had made for the down payment. I even included the check image from the house I sold. All the pieces were there, proof that I hadn't just helped, I had built that home. But this time, I wasn't collecting them to plead my case. I wasn't planning to confront Nathan. I wasn't going to barge in and demand my due. No, I was doing something I'd never really done before in my life. I was protecting myself. See, I spent most of my adult life giving. Cooking for holidays, babysitting, paying bills when Nathan was in college, and just needed a little extra. I gave because that's what mothers do, but mothers aren't made of air. We don't live on the thanks we hope we'll get. And eventually, we notice when we're being used as scaffolding for someone else's life, never meant to be seen, only to hold it all up. That week, I started writing a timeline, not out of pettiness, but clarity. I needed to see it for myself. The house sold, the money transferred, the promises made, the move, the suite that never was, the senior apartment, the lemon bars, Mother's Day, Diane. Seeing it on paper made it real in a way it hadn't been before. It also made it obvious that I was not just forgotten. I had been edited out, and no one was coming to fix that. So I decided I wouldn't wait to be remembered. I would remember myself. I placed the just-in-case folder inside the small locked file box under my bed. I didn't know when I'd use it. Maybe I never would, but it was there. My name was still on the loan. My hand had built their home. My silence had been taken for weakness. That was about to change, because a quiet woman with a paper trail is never really powerless. She's just patient. It's funny how no one notices when a woman stops talking. They just assume she's fine, or tired, or getting older. But silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's a decision. After I created that just-in-case folder, I didn't rush. I didn't storm into Nathan's house waving documents. I didn't even stop by. Instead, I started going to the credit union more regularly. Not to stir trouble, just to ask questions. I became a familiar face to the staff, polite, friendly, the kind of woman who people assume bakes cookies for church picnics. And I did. But now I also studied loan structures, deed transfers, escrow processes. Knowledge, I realized, is a kind of quiet revenge. The more I learned, the calmer I became. I no longer needed to beg for space in my own son's life. I was building something else now. Something mine. A few weeks later, I requested a private meeting with a senior advisor at the bank. Her name was April, mid-30s, smart, sharp, but kind. I brought all my papers, not to start a war, just to understand the battlefield. April flipped through the folder and looked at me carefully. "You're still legally tied to the loan," she said. "If you withdraw your name, we'll need to reassess Nathan's financials. If he doesn't qualify a loan, well, the house becomes unstable. And if it's unstable, foreclosure is possible." I nodded. "And if I were to buy the house during a foreclosure sale?" April raised an eyebrow. "It's rare, but not impossible. It would be a clean break." That was all I needed to know. I didn't act that day or the next, but I walked home with my shoulders straighter than they'd been in months. And then, life gave me a gift I didn't ask for. Jen posted a photo on Facebook, something about blessings and new beginnings. The picture showed her and Nathan standing in the backyard with a "for sale by owner" sign. I stared at the image, my heart thudding. They were trying to sell the house I co-signed, the house that still bore my name on the loan. I clicked on the listing. The asking price was $445,000. I nearly laughed. The house had gained value, sure, but not because of anything they'd done. It was location, timing, the kind of luck that only feels earned. I called the credit union the next day. "I'd like to begin the process of withdrawing from the loan as guarantor," I said calmly, "and I'd like to notify the bank that the house is being marketed for sale, without the knowledge or consent of all obligated parties." There was silence on the other end. "I see," April said slowly. "That changes things." Indeed it did. A week later, Nathan called me for the first time in months. His voice was tight, clipped. "Mom, did you contact the bank?" I didn't flinch. "Yes." "Why would you do that?" I almost said, "Why would you try to sell a house behind my back?" But I didn't. I just said, "Because it's my right." He paused, then muttered, "You're making things difficult." "No, Nathan," I said. You did that when you forgot who helped you build your life." He hung up. It hurt. Of course it did. But it didn't break me, because this time I wasn't speaking out of hurt. I was speaking from power. Over the next few weeks, I let the system do what it was built to do. The mortgage fell into scrutiny. The buyer they had lined up backed out when the paperwork stalled. The listing was pulled, and Nathan and Jen, well, they began to realize something they hadn't expected. I was not a ghost. I was a signature, and signatures don't disappear. One afternoon, Jen showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen her in almost 6 months. She brought a pie. I didn't open the screen door. I just looked at her through the mesh. "Hi, Margaret," she said, voice soft. "We wanted to talk about the house, about moving forward." I tilted my head. "You mean you want me to undo what I did?" She blinked. "Well, we didn't think it would come to this." "No," I said, still calm. "You thought I wouldn't say anything, that I'd keep baking lemon bars and sitting on porches I no longer belong to." She didn't answer. "I'm not angry," I added, "but I am awake now." Jen swallowed hard. "Can we come in and talk?" I shook my head. "Not today. I've said all I needed to, silently." She left the pie on the doorstep. I didn't bring it inside. That night, I took the pie to the common room and left it on the table with a note, "Free to anyone who needs something sweet." And then I went back to my file folder. The plan wasn't finished yet, but it had started. Sometimes the most dangerous woman in the room is the one no one noticed was keeping track, the one who gave quietly, and now reclaims quietly. 3 weeks after Jen left the pie, I got a letter from the bank. It was official now. My name had been withdrawn as guarantor, and Nathan's financials had failed the reassessment. Without my credit backing, the bank reclassified the mortgage as high risk. They gave a 30-day notice to resolve the issue, or the loan would be marked for repossession. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing joyful about it, but there was something steadying, like the ground had stopped shifting under my feet. For the first time in over a year, I felt anchored. Nathan called again. This time, he didn't yell. He didn't even try to guilt me. He just said, "We're moving out. We can't afford the loan. The bank's made that clear." I said nothing. After a pause, he added, "We've packed most things already. They're coming next week to start paperwork on a short sale." "Will you need help?" I asked, surprising even myself. He paused. "We'll manage." It wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was just final. That weekend, I visited the house. I hadn't been back in nearly a year. The front porch still had the faded doormat I'd bought when we first toured it together. The bushes had overgrown and one shutter was loose, flapping slightly in the wind. It looked tired. So did Nathan when he opened the door. He didn't say much, just stepped aside. I walked through the living room, now half empty. No laughter, no clinking glasses, just dust motes in the sunlight. The basement door was open. I walked down. The suite that had never happened was just a concrete floor and exposed insulation. There were still some paint cans stacked in a corner, untouched. He followed me downstairs. "I always meant to finish it," he said quietly. "It just kept getting pushed." I didn't answer right away. I touched the wall, rough and cold beneath my palm. I used to imagine reading bedtime stories down here. I even picked out curtains. He looked down at his shoes. "I'm sorry, Mom." Not defensive, not performative, just tired. I nodded. "I know." He walked me back up. At the doorway, I turned. "When you move out, leave the documents on the counter. All of them." "You're taking the house?" "I'm buying it back, at auction if needed. I have the funds." He didn't argue. When I got home, I called the bank. "I want to be notified when the foreclosure process begins. I'm prepared to make an immediate cash offer." April called back 2 days later. "The house will go into pre-foreclosure next week. You'll have the first right of bid." And just like that, the home I once gave away returned to me. Not because I demanded it, but because I outlasted the lie. You see, sometimes dignity isn't restored with noise. It comes back in quiet, steady steps. And this time, I walked through the front door, not as someone's mother, not as a guest, but as the rightful owner. The locks were changed. The kitchen was cleaned. The basement still needed work, but I didn't mind. I wasn't rebuilding a suite anymore. I was rebuilding myself. Neighbors started noticing. "Thought your son lived here," one man said, raking leaves across the street. "He did," I answered. "Now it's just me." They didn't ask questions, but I saw something flicker in their eyes. Respect, maybe. Or surprise. Like they hadn't expected me to be the one left standing. And I'll ask you, if you're listening, have you ever been made to feel disposable by your own family? Like your sacrifices had an expiration date? If you have, tell me. I want to know I'm not the only one. Because this, right here, this chapter of my life, is not a tale of revenge. It's the quiet return of worth. A revenge story without rage, just remembering. 1 month later, I planted lavender in the front yard. I hung new curtains. I even re-seasoned the old pie dish and baked lemon bars again, this time for myself. They tasted like closure. I didn't invite Nathan or Jen. I didn't send a photo. I didn't leave crumbs on their porch, because this wasn't for them. It was for the version of me who once stood there, holding a warm basket and a hopeful heart. She deserved to be remembered, and in this house, she finally was. I used to wake up early out of habit. Years of being a mother taught me that. The quiet moments before the house fills with noise. But now the house was quiet all the time, and somehow that silence had stopped feeling like a punishment. Mornings were mine again. I brewed my coffee slowly, taking time to grind the beans the way I used to when life still had rhythm. I opened the windows to let in the breeze. No TV blaring, no rushed voices, just the creak of old floors and bird song from the maple tree out front. This house didn't feel like theirs anymore. It felt like it remembered me. There were dents in the baseboards from Nathan's toy trucks, a faded crayon mark behind the pantry door from when he was 4 and insisted on drawing a spaceship control panel. I used to clean around it. Now I left it there, like proof that I had been here first. I started unpacking parts of myself I hadn't touched in years. Old cookbooks, my embroidery kit, the piano sheet music from college. I even set up a small garden in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just herbs and tomatoes. Enough to remind me that things can still grow, even when you thought the season had passed. People would probably say I was healing, but I don't think it was that simple. I wasn't just recovering from pain. I was remembering who I was before I gave it all away. Because sometimes, when you spend years being needed, you forget how to be whole without someone else's crisis to fix. One afternoon, while pruning my basil, I heard footsteps behind the fence. I peeked over. It was Nathan. He didn't notice me right away. He was walking slowly, hands in his pockets, as if just passing through the neighborhood. But he paused at the edge of my yard, near the mailbox. When he finally looked up and saw me, I nodded. He raised a hand. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Nathan." He hesitated. "Just walking by. Figured I'd see if you were home." "I am." Another silence, then, "House looks good." "Thank you." He shifted on his feet. "Do you think maybe sometime I could come by? Just for coffee or something?" I didn't answer right away, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know. This wasn't the version of me who waited by the phone or baked lemon bars to earn love. This version of me had found her footing, and when someone has learned to stand alone, they don't lean out of loneliness anymore. "I'll think about it," I said finally. He nodded. "Okay." He didn't ask to come in, and I didn't invite him. That boundary was mine now, and it was firm, not because I was angry, but because I was whole. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about how strange it was, how we spend our lives preparing our children for the world, only to realize that no one prepares us for what happens when they no longer need us, or worse, when they believe they don't. And I wonder, have you ever gone through something like that? Have you ever felt like you gave everything, only to be quietly pushed out once you were no longer useful? If that speaks to you, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. You see, I'm not telling this for sympathy or revenge. This isn't about getting back at anyone. This is about getting back to myself. It's strange. My name was never on the deed, but this house has never felt more mine. Not because of the paperwork, but because of what I reclaimed inside it. Peace, dignity, the quiet joy of brewing tea in a kitchen that doesn't expect me to disappear. That night, I lit a candle and walked the hallway barefoot, touching the walls as I passed. This was my space. Not a gift I was waiting to be invited into, not a corner I was allowed to borrow. Mine. And maybe Nathan would visit someday. Maybe he wouldn't. But that decision was no longer about guilt or hope. It was about choice. My choice. Because when a woman finds her silence again, not the one that comes from being dismissed, but the one she chooses, she becomes something most people don't expect. Unshakable. I didn't expect to hear from Nathan again so soon. But 2 weeks after that short, quiet conversation by the garden, he showed up at my door with something in his hand. A letter. "I think this belongs to you," he said, holding out the envelope. I took it. My name and address were written in my handwriting. I blinked. "Where did you get this?" It was in one of the boxes we hadn't unpacked. From the basement, I opened it without reading the name. I nodded slowly, remembering. It was a letter I'd written nearly a year ago but never sent. A letter I wrote on the night I moved out, when I realized the in-laws had taken the guest room and I was being shuffled into that temporary apartment like a spare coat no one had room for. I hadn't even remembered keeping it. He looked uneasy. I read it. "I'm sorry." I opened the door a little wider. "You might as well come in." We sat at the kitchen table. I didn't offer him tea, not out of coldness, but because I wasn't hosting. This was my house. I didn't need to perform anymore. "I didn't know," he said. "I mean, I knew you were upset, but I didn't realize how much you'd given up, or how much I had pushed you out." I folded the letter and set it aside. "You didn't want to see it then?" "No," he admitted. "I didn't." He looked down at the wood grain of the table like it held answers he couldn't find. "You said in the letter," he continued, "that the worst part wasn't losing the house or the money, but the feeling that you'd been erased." I didn't speak. I just let the words settle. "I guess I thought you were okay with everything. You never said much." "I didn't think I had the right to," I said quietly. "I thought being a good mother meant not asking for anything back." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I was wrong. So wrong." There was a long silence after that. Not tense, just full, like we both needed to sit in it for a while. He finally looked up. "I can't fix it, I know that, but if there's anything I can do..." "There is," I said, cutting him off gently. He straightened a little, as if ready to act. "You can stop trying to fix me like I'm broken. I'm not. I've put myself back together in my own time, in my own way. What I need now is not a repair job." He looked stunned, then slowly nodded. "I think I'm just realizing," he said, "that I've never really known you, just as mom, the person who handled things." "Well," I said, standing up, "it's never too late to get to know me, but that depends on whether you're coming as my son or as someone who finally sees me as a person." He looked at me carefully. "I'd like to be both." I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The sun was low in the sky, casting long orange streaks across the garden. The basil had grown fuller, and the tomatoes were starting to bloom. Maybe we were all late bloomers in this family. "I've started writing again," I said suddenly. "Not anything fancy, just reflections about the house, about motherhood, about the parts of me I forgot while raising someone else." He smiled faintly. "You always used to write. I remember finding notebooks tucked in drawers. Back then I thought no one wanted to read what I had to say. Now I write because I want to hear myself again." He nodded. "Can I read something sometime?" "Maybe." He took the hint and stood. He didn't press. He just said, "Thank you for letting me in today. Thank you for listening." When he left, I sat back down and unfolded the letter again. It wasn't perfect. Some of the sentences rambled. The pain was raw, unfiltered, but it wasn't shameful. It was honest, and maybe it needed to be read, not to make him feel guilty, but to remind both of us what had been lost and what was now slowly, quietly being restored. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill and opened a new journal. The first line I wrote was simple. You don't have to be loud to be remembered. Fall arrived quietly, as if tiptoeing into the yard. The maple leaves turned gold and red, and I found myself spending more afternoons on the porch, a blanket over my knees and a cup of chamomile in hand. It was peaceful, almost suspiciously so. Then one Saturday morning, I heard the familiar sound of gravel crunching under tires. A car I recognized parked at the curb. It was Nathan and Jen. I watched them from behind the curtain, neither surprised nor shaken. They stood outside their car for a minute, clearly arguing. Low voices, sharp hand gestures, the kind of tension married people think they're hiding but never quite do. Then they walked up the path and rang the bell. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Hi, Mom," Nathan said, forcing a smile. "Can we come in?" I looked them over. No groceries, no flowers, no apology pie this time. Just two people who suddenly remembered where the house keys used to be. "I'm just heading out," I said calmly, though I was in slippers and hadn't left the house all week. Jen stepped forward, her tone rehearsed. "We were hoping to talk. There's been some stuff going on. Nathan's job got downsized. We've had to move into a smaller place, and you need money," I finished for her. Jen blinked, caught off guard. Nathan didn't deny it. "We thought maybe you could help," he said, not even trying to sugarcoat it. "Because I have the house now," I added. He looked uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." They exchanged a glance. "I gave everything once," I said, voice still gentle. "You didn't just take the house. You took the space I made in my life for you. And when I needed a corner to rest in, I was told I was an inconvenience." Nathan looked down. Jen stayed silent. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "Good," I said, "because there's nothing to fight over. This house is mine now. Not because I reclaimed it in anger, but because I was done being invisible." Jen scoffed, just a little. "So, that's it? After everything we've been through, you just shut the door?" I met her eyes. "I'm not shutting the door. I'm finally locking it for my own peace." They didn't know what to say to that, and if you're listening to this and wondering if that's cold, let me ask you something. What would you do if your own child only knocked when they needed help, but never when you were hurting? Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and your role as mom? Tell me below, because I know I'm not the only one. Nathan tried again. "Mom, I'm sorry. I truly am. I messed up. We both did." "I know," I said, "but I've stopped building bridges for people who only cross them to take things from me." I didn't say it with venom. I wasn't trying to wound. I was just done bleeding. They stood there a moment longer, waiting for me to flinch, to soften. I didn't. Eventually, they walked back to the car. No dramatic exit, no final words, just silence, the kind that says more than shouting ever could. I closed the door and leaned against it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was steady. Later that evening, I baked a cobbler and brought it to Marlene, my neighbor down the street whose hip surgery had kept her inside for weeks. We sat on her porch, watching the leaves drift. "I saw your son out front earlier," she said gently. "Yep," I replied. "He came asking for something." "Did you give it to him?" "No," I said, "but I gave myself something better." She didn't ask what that was, but I think she knew. That night, I wrote in my journal again, "It's not selfish to say no, it's survival. Being a mother doesn't mean you owe your soul, especially to people who treat it like it's disposable." And as I turned off the light, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for calls, not for invitations, not for apologies wrapped in need. I was living. It's strange the day you realize you don't owe anyone an explanation for your peace. For so long, I measured myself by what I could offer. My time, my money, my patience, my presence. I thought if I just kept showing up, they'd remember who I was. But lately, I've been showing up only for myself. I started volunteering at the local library on Tuesdays, just shelving books, chatting with people who still love paper and silence. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. The teacher, Miss Elaine, said I had a natural softness in my brushstroke. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that. Something kind and unnecessary. I also started walking every morning just around the neighborhood. No purpose, no destination. Just me, the sidewalk, and the sound of leaves crackling underfoot. One morning, I passed by a yard with a little girl chasing bubbles, laughing like nothing had ever hurt her. And for the first time in a long while, I laughed too. The thing is, when you stop waiting for someone to give your life meaning, it surprises you where you start finding it. I don't check my phone hoping for messages anymore. I don't linger near the window on holidays. I've stopped pretending I'm not home when the silence gets too loud. Now I play music. I open the curtains wide. I let the afternoon sun stain the floor golden. This isn't the life I thought I'd have at 74, but it's mine now. And I didn't ask anyone if it was okay to claim it. The other day, I was dusting off old frames and found a photo of Nathan when he was about 9, sitting on my lap with a missing front tooth and chocolate ice cream on his shirt. I smiled at it, not with pain, but with something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. That little boy still lives somewhere in the man who forgot me, and I still love him, but I don't center my life around him anymore. And that shift, it's everything, because I'm not bitter. I'm done. Done trying to fix what won't be acknowledged. Done building bridges to people who never intended to cross them. Instead, I build a bench under the oak tree in the backyard. Just me, my tea, and whatever book I'm in the middle of. Sometimes birds land nearby. Sometimes squirrels steal the strawberries I try to grow. I don't mind. They don't owe me anything, and I don't expect them to say thank you. It's a strange kind of freedom, this quiet reclaiming. And I wonder, have you ever had that moment? The one where you realize the apology you've been waiting for may never come, but you're going to be okay anyway? If you have, tell me in the comments, because that moment deserves to be shared. I've also started writing again, not just in my journal, but little stories, fiction, sometimes about women like me. Invisible at first, but never truly gone. Women who stitch their lives back together in quiet rooms, who plant things just to watch them grow. One story I'm working on is about a woman who bakes pies for strangers and never tells them why. They just think she's being sweet. But the truth is, each pie is a memory she's reclaiming, slice by slice. Maybe I'll read it someday out loud on a slow Sunday. Or maybe I'll keep it to myself. Not every healing needs an audience. The truth is, the house is still quiet, but it no longer feels empty. It feels full of me, of who I've become. And that, more than any apology, is enough. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary morning you forget as it's happening. I was watering the tomatoes, humming some song I couldn't name, when I heard a knock on the fence. Not the front door, not the bell. Just a light, hesitant knock on the wooden post by the side gate. I turned. It was Jen. I hadn't seen her since the morning they came asking for help. She looked different, tired, less put together than usual. Her eyes were softer, or maybe just less guarded. "Hi," she said. I nodded, not inviting anything, but not blocking it either. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she added quickly. I wanted to say something." I wiped my hands on my apron. "All right." She shifted on her feet. "I found something in Nathan's drawer, a letter, the one you wrote last year." I froze for a moment, then slowly said, "He showed it to you?" "No, he didn't know I saw it. I was looking for a stamp and, well, I read it." She didn't apologize for reading it. Somehow, that felt more honest than if she had. "I didn't realize how much we took from you," she said, eyes lowered. "I thought I was just being efficient, setting boundaries, making space for our new life. I didn't see that we were erasing someone else's." I didn't speak. I let her words hang. I'm not here to defend myself or to fix it. I wanted you to know that I see it now, all of it. The dinners, the holidays, the nights you gave up sleep to help with the baby, the money, the house, the silence. She looked up at me. I used to tell myself you were just the mother-in-law, that you didn't need anything. But you were the only one holding the center, and when we pushed you out, everything else started to fall apart. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from the quiet shock of finally being seen. Not because I demanded it, not because I made a scene, but because, over time, truth has a way of rising through the cracks. Jen swallowed. Nathan doesn't know I'm here. And honestly, we're not doing great. We don't talk like we used to. There's this space between us that keeps growing, and I think part of that space has your name on it. I didn't mean to. Truly, I didn't. But a tear slipped down my cheek. Not because I needed her approval, not because I wanted a reconciliation, but because someone finally said the thing I stopped hoping anyone would say. You mattered. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I stepped back and opened the side gate. Would you like some tea? I asked. She blinked. Yes, I'd like that. We sat on the porch, two women who hadn't spoken in months, sipping tea out of mismatched mugs. She noticed the lavender I planted near the steps. It smells like peace, she said. It is, I replied. Hard-earned. She gave a small laugh, and then silence settled between us. Comfortable, not tense. Before she left, she turned to me and said, I can't undo what we did, but I hope you know, it wasn't because you were unlovable. It was because we were selfish and blind. I nodded. I know that now. And that's all I needed. Not an apology wrapped in guilt. Not tears. Just the simple acknowledgement that I hadn't imagined it all. I was there. I gave. And finally, someone said they saw it. Later that day, I wrote in my journal, recognition doesn't always arrive with a parade. Sometimes it comes quietly on a Tuesday morning at the side gate, and that's enough. And for anyone watching this, have you ever received an apology too late, but still felt something inside you settle when it came? I want to hear about it, because sometimes even late tenderness matters. That night, I sat on the porch long after the sun went down. The wind was gentle. The stars were few but clear. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone who had been forgotten. I felt like someone who had been remembered. The first snow came early that year, soft, hushed, and steady, like the kind that blankets the world without asking permission. I watched it fall from my kitchen window, the same one I used to scrub while wondering where I'd gone in my own life. Now I watched it without urgency, without ache. The house was warm, not just from the heater, but from the quiet sense that nothing was being taken from me anymore. I had chosen everything in this space now. The curtains were no longer temporary. The lamp in the corner was something I bought because I liked it, not because it matched anyone's expectations. The photos on the shelf were of me and my friends, my plants, my tomatoes from the backyard. There was a framed one of me laughing with Marlene last fall, a slice of pie in hand, joy spilling out of a moment we hadn't planned. There was no picture of Nathan, not because I didn't love him anymore, but because I had learned that love and proximity were not the same, and dignity, that had become non-negotiable. On New Year's Day, I walked out to the porch with my tea and wrapped myself in a wool shawl. It had been a quiet holiday. No calls, no visits. But I didn't feel forgotten. I felt uncluttered. My neighbor's grandkids came by with sparklers the night before. They'd giggled and waved them in the air, asking me if I wanted to light one. I did. Just one, and I laughed like someone who wasn't afraid of being alone anymore, because I wasn't. I had rebuilt a life, not from rage or revenge, but from the slow, intentional act of remembering that I matter too. I hadn't made some grand declaration. I hadn't confronted anyone in public. I hadn't posted my pain online or demanded explanations. I had simply changed the locks on my doors, on my patterns, on the part of me that used to apologize for taking up space. And here's the part that surprised me the most. the world didn't collapse. No one chased after me with torches. No one begged me to return. And still, somehow, I felt more whole than I ever had when I was bending myself into usefulness. In the spring, I joined a book club at the library. We didn't always finish the books, but we finished our coffee. We told stories. We laughed like girls again, like people who knew they were allowed to take up time and volume. One afternoon, Marlene leaned over and said, "You're glowing lately, you know that?" I smiled. "I think it's the freedom." Nathan called once in April, just to check in. I told him I was doing well. I asked nothing of him, and he didn't offer more than he could give. It was enough, because I no longer measured my life by his words, his needs, his validation. I measured it by how full my heart felt at the end of a day I chose for myself. And on Mother's Day that year, I did something radical. I didn't wait by the phone. I packed a sandwich, a thermos of lemonade, and a book, and I took myself to the park. I sat under a tree and read until the sun leaned low. A little girl passed by with her mom and handed me a dandelion puff. "For you," she said, and skipped off before I could even thank her. And just like that, I felt the universe whisper, "You didn't need to fight for recognition. You just had to stop asking permission to be whole." That night, I wrote the last entry in that particular journal. I was never erased. I just needed to stop giving the pen to people who couldn't see me. And now, I wonder, how did you reclaim your space? Was it loud? Quiet? Was it one moment or 1,000 small choices? Tell me below, because I think more people need to know that not every revenge story is about shouting. Sometimes, the sweetest justice is peace.